to knock this nut out, which wasn't fitting. There's a huge gap right in here. It's probably 1/16 of an inch or more. You take that out, and somebody has put some yucky stuff underneath here. Feels like plaster of Paris, maybe?
The chisel I'm using here is a Japanese carving chisel that I got from Lee Valley Tools here in Canada. I thought that this was really an exceptional tool. It's very sharp, and it works really well in these confined places. Not a sponsor, but I do think that this is a really nice tool, and it's fairly inexpensive too. So someone had widened the slot of this nut slot so wide that it was never going to fit properly. So eventually I ended up filling in the gap on the headstock side of things with a couple sheets of dark veneer that would allow it to fit more snugly into that slot.
That. Something very wrong here.
Yeah, the bottom of this nut slot was basically a hump that I had to deal with. So, I ended up making a little sanding beam out of a nut blank in order to sand that so that it was smoother. But it was pretty glitched underneath there. So I'm using a half pencil to rough in the height of the nut so that I can get the slotting proper for the strings at the proper depth. So the half nut or the half pencil shows me, about where I should be aiming for with the nut slots. Alright, this nut slot is not flat, and it is not even straight across there. So what I've done is I've crazy glued a little piece of sandpaper onto the bottom of this nut, and then I'm going to move it. I made some pencil lines on the bottom, and now I'm moving this back and forth to try to get down to the pencil lines so that the nut will sit flush. It was rocking like crazy when I put it in here. Rocking like grandma on an Arkansas porch. I turned down the volume on the vacuum. You can thank me later. So this nut slot was really deep, and what I'm going to do is I'm basically checking with the pencils when I get really close to the top of the standard nut blank, because I'm getting real close to having it so that the height of the strings is going to be right at the top of a nut blank, so I want to make sure that I'm not going too far. I put a couple of small pieces of veneer in here to take in this gap so that the next person coming along is going to doesn't have to deal with an oversized nut slot. So now I've marked this as being the outside width,
This is at the edge, so now I'm going to cut this little piece off here, and then I'm going to shape the nut so that it fits, and then I'll cut the slots.
This is a new nut blank, by the way. The other one that I used for filing the slot, I kept. So this is a brand new nut blank. Cutting it with a razor saw. I got this razor saw from Solo Guitars in Canada. It's a nice saw. Again, I'm not a sponsor. What I'm doing here is protecting the finish on each side of the nut so that I can get this nut to fit fairly precisely without running into the guitar neck itself and doing damage to it. The end of the nut has a bit of a curve on it. The neck curves at this point in time, so I'm using a semi-rounded file to shape the nut to the proper shape for the edge of the guitar. I've marked the pencil lines here with the on the nut so that it conforms to the shape of the neck, and now I'm just fine-tuning it with a file. So I deleted about 15 minutes of carefully getting this nut to be the right size for the slot. But it's slow, careful work. I'm going to start getting close to the edge of the fingerboard here in the headstock, so I need to protect it with some tape against the file, even though you're going pretty slow and carefully. Compare the new nut out of bone to the old piece of plastic that was in there. See how they compare for size and fit. I have to use both vision and feel to make sure that the nut is fitting. I think feel is as important as what you see.
So I'm going to take my half pencil and just make sure that we have something to work with. That is pretty good. I don't think I want it any lower than that. So now I'm going to shape the back of this a little bit with the file.
Shaping the curve on the back of the nut here with a file. Sorry that I'm a little off camera. Now I'm sanding it with a bit of fine sandpaper, refining the shape. So I'm using the existing nut to figure out the spacing for the low and the high E strings so that they're going to be at about the same spot as they were before. This little vise is a model maker's vise that I got from Lee Valley Tools. It's pretty handy for the nuts. And again, I'm not a sponsor. So what I'm going to use here is a string spacing rule. What this does is it figures out the distance between the E's, and then it'll allow the distance between the strings to be the same rather than the distance between the slots, which some people prefer. Took me a while to find the right combination that would lead to 4 strings in between the 2 that I have here, but eventually I did get it.
It'd be great if it was a 7th string.
I got this string spacing rule from Philadelphia Luthier Supply. Again, I'm not a sponsor to anybody, so. It seriously took me about 15 minutes to figure this out, where these strings were. The ruler has 2 sets of slots, and you've got to figure out which ones you're using, which was a pain, but I did eventually get it figured out. The slots in the ruler are the right width for a 0.5 pencil, so that you can mark it with your pencil. Get accurate results that way. I pre-cut the slots with this very fine, ultra-fine razor saw, again something I got from Solo Guitars. And then using my nut slotting files, I basically started the nut slots. Sorry to be off camera for doing this.
So with this Guild, what had to happen here was the nut slot had to be narrowed by putting in some veneers that filled in the gap that someone had made by sawing it too wide. There's a new nut.
Sorry not to have all the other video of me cutting it with the nut slots, but basically I just went through with the standard nut slots and got the nuts to the right depth and set the string height properly.